Greetings from the Erie Coast. This is Mad Shad. What are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about the Mangudai. This little thing. Yeah. The Mangudai from the 12th century, Genghis Khan. So, I'm going to read this verbatim. It was the last of the 12th century. Temujin, clan of the Yaka Mongols, Temujin, also known as Genghis Khan, had left his people on a hunt toward the land of the Karaites. A circle of riders had driven a good number of antelope, deer, and lesser game before him. The circle was closed, and the twang of the stout, curved bows continued until the last living creature laid still among the bowmen. There was no dallying about on a Mongol hunt. Who wrote this? Their covered tent carts and camel carts awaited them off somewhere in the prairie. When the hunters returned, the oxen and camel were unspanned, and the yurks were set up. The yurk was a Mongol tent made of felt stretched over a framework of wattled rods with an opening at the top to let out smoke. Its dome-like shape enabled it to withstand the buffeting of the wind that swept the bare plain of the Gobi. Fires were lit. Much of the game taken was to be kept as a gift for the aged Wang Khan, Lord of the Karaites. The Karaites had been overbearing to the Yakas. The men of the Wang Khan had taken spoil rightly belonging to the Temujin's men. He had many enemies in the land of the Karaites who wished to see him ousted from the clanship of the Yaka Mongols and the favor of the Wang Khan. So Temujin was on his way to see the Karaite lord, his foster father. It had been agreed between them that if any differences arose, one would not act against the other. Instead, they were to meet together and talk quietly until the truth of the matter was clear to them. There were groups of warriors among the Karaites who favored Temujin. The bodyguard of Wang Khan had been urged by the enemies of the Mongol Khan to seize him, but they had refused, and offers of marriage had been sent to the Yaka Mongols. The Karaites had a bride for Temujin's eldest son, Juchi, among the girls of the Wang Khan family. But Temujin had learned much from the bitter experience of his life. He remained in his camp and where he kept his distance from the Karaite tent village while sending riders before him to assure the way was safe. The riders never returned. 2 horse herds galloped in at night and brought news of the Karaites to Temujin. The tall, red-haired Khan of the Yaka Mongols sat on a white horse skin in front of the yurk coated with white lime and listened to the tale told by the horse herds. It was both unwelcome and ominous. The enemies of Temujin in the west had decided to put an end to him. They had persuaded the old Wang Khan of the Karaites to throw his strength in with theirs. As Temujin had half suspected, the marriage offer had been a ruse to lure him into a trap that would end his life. The Karaites, the 2 herdsmen, told him were drawing near his camp. They intended to burst upon it during the night and slay the Khan of the Yakas in his tent. The situation was desperate. The Karaites had put over 50,000 warriors in the field. Temujin and his families and his warriors to preserve. Of armed men, he had 6,000. Some accounts placed the numbers at less than 3,000. But he had been warned, and Temujin did not waste a minute before acting. He sent the guards of his own yurk through the encampment, rousing the sleepers, warning the leaders, and routing out the herd boys. The herds were driven off to be stampeded before daylight and scattered as much as possible. There was no way to save them. The goal was to keep them from falling into the hands of the attacking Karaites. The people hastened to mount their horses they always kept at hand. The light camel carts were quickly filled with chests as well as the women, and without wailing or argument, the eastward retreat began. Temujin left the yurks and the great ox carts standing. He detached a few men with fine horses to keep the fires in the camp burning brightly. They were to abandon the camps at the moment before the Karaites entered it. With his officers and the best of his warriors, Temujin retired slowly, covering the retreat. There was no chance to escape the horde of Karaites drawing near under the cover of darkness. The Yaka Mongols rode 8 or 9 miles toward a mass of hills that would offer them some shelter to his men if they were defeated and forced to scatter. After crossing a stream, he halted his riders within a gorge before the horses became weary. He would wait for the enemy there. Meanwhile, the Karaites swept into the deserted Yaka camp before daybreak. The white felt tent of the Khan was riddled with arrows before they noticed the silence that filled the place, the absence of the herds, and the absence of Temujin's standard of 9 yak tails. A period of confusion and consolation ensued. The bright fires had led them to believe the Yaka Mongols were still in their tents. When they searched the camp and finally understood that the tents had been abandoned, but with the carpets, the utensils, even the spare saddles and the milk sacks, it seemed to Wang Khan, the Karats, and that Temujin and his Mongol clan had fled from them in fear and disorder. The broad trail to the east left by the retreating Mongols was only barely obscured by the darkness. The scent of victory was in their nostrils, and the Karaites took off in a gallop in pursuit. With huge clouds of dust rolling up behind them, they arrived at the foothills holding Temujin's clan soon after dawn. Temujin had watched the thundering approach of the Karaites. In their zeal to destroy him, they had allowed their column to stretch out. The best horses had forged well ahead of the slower ones, and this meant the vanguard of the Karaites was riding on lathered, winded mounts, tired horses. Instead of waiting in the gorge to be attacked, Temujin led his warriors on their rested horses in a tight formation, out and across the stream. They drove the Karate advance party before them and reformed on the rolling grassland to cover the continuing retreat of the camel carts. Then Wang Khan and his chieftains arrived at the point of contact. The scattered vanguard was reformed, along with the latter arriving troops, and the battle to exterminate Temujin and the Yaka Mongols has begun. Temujin's limited numbers precluded any offensive actions, so he was limited to a last resort for the Mongol warrior, defending with what little advantage the ground gave him. As the day wore on, it became obvious that destruction was inevitable. The desperate fury of the Yakas was no match for the overwhelming numbers of the Karaites. The clans of Temujin were shattered. The Karaites were breaking through his lines, and darkness was coming. It's a full day of battle. Man. In the face of impending disaster, Temujin called upon his standard bearer, Gildar, in order for him to encircle around the mass of Karaites and plant the standard of the nine yak tails on the hill to their left rear, a hill known as Mount Gupta. Temujin hoped this would confuse the Karaites into believing the Yaka Mongols were executing the Tulunghang, or standard sweep, that turns an enemy's flank and takes him in the rear. This type of encircling movement was a favorite maneuver of the Mongols. Watch the mongrels. At this point, Gildar's mission was no more than a desperate attempt to stave off slaughter. Temujin sent no other soldiers with Gildar because it was an assignment with little or no chance of survival, and there was no point in throwing away lives needlessly. The then wearily Gildar surveyed the field and spoke to Temujin. "O Khan, my brother, I mount my best horse and break through all who oppose me. I will plant thy yak-tailed standard on Gupta. I will show thee my valor, and if I fail, do not nourish or rear my children. Do thou nourish and rear my children. It is all one to me when my end comes. Miraculously, the stalwart Gullard was able to circle the Karates, reach the hill, and plant the standard of the 9 yak tails upon it. The appearance of Temujin's standard in his rear confused Wang Khan. Ouch. Wang Khan restrained his forces. As the sun set, it was the Karates and not the Mongols who withdrew a little from the field. Temujin waited only for the return of Gundar and the recovery of his wounded warriors before he retreated to the east. The Karates picked up the pursuit the next day. It had been the most desperate battle of Temujin's career, and he had been defeated soundly. But he had invaded extermination. He kept himself alive, the nucleus of his clansmen intact, and the withdrawal of their women and children had been safeguarded. Something else happened that day on Mount Gupta. Gildar's bearing of the standard on Gupta is still spoken of in Mongol legend, and the tremendous impact of a single picked man employed at a critical time and place was not lost on Temujin. The number of men and their impact would be multiplied in Temujin's next engagement. Temujin had eluded defeat, but the war was still on, and the balance of forces was such that only by an exceptional act of courage could the Mongols hope to escape disaster. The Karates were hewn on the same hard substance of the Mongols, and their vast superiority in numbers added to the fact that by guarding their family's rear, the Mongols were severely restricted in their tactical freedom of movement. It had convinced the Karate leader that their victory was certain. In the course of the day, when the first horses of the Karate advance guard appeared on the horizon, Temujin called for volunteers who were willing to sacrifice their lives. The education of the warriors to absolute loyalty now proved itself, and many volunteers crowded around him, ready for any encounter with the enemy, no matter how hopeless. Temujin selected 50 men from amongst these and explained their mission to them. You will filter through the advance guard of the Karats and attack their main force of 20,000 men. None of you is to be taken prisoner. None of you will return. You will strike at the enemy until the last of you falls in battle. The volunteers parted from their comrades and rode in the direction of the Karate's main column. As a small band, they were able to make the most of the deep ravines and other topographical advantages to slip through the Karate's advance guard without attracting attention. When they came to the broad plain where the main body of the Karates were, they formed themselves for battle and charged into them. The Karates thought this was only the spearhead of a heavier attack, and they sent a full halt to their forces, almost 10,000 horsemen, to meet the Mongol charge. This was the first action by a group of men who had already forfeited their lives, and even though the Mongols were known as brave warriors, such ferocity and fighting spirit had never been encountered before by the Karates. If Temujin had another 3,000 such warriors as these, they had no desire to engage them in similar confrontation. But since pride and honor forbade them from terminating the pursuit, they merely slowed it down sufficiently to enable the Mongols to slip out of their grasp. The charge of the Yaka volunteers on the main Karate body was viewed by the other tribes of the Gobi as the desperate actions of a defeated army. The Mongols of Temujin saw it as a correct action dictated by unique circumstances. Temujin saw it in a different light. He had seen what Gudar had done at Mount Gupta and what 50 like him could do against 200 times their number. He envisioned the formation of volunteer units on the basis of willingness for self-sacrifice. His imagination had conjured up an image of fighting units with a discipline and effectiveness that the world had never known. In keeping with that temperament, Temujin translated the ideas into action. On this occasion, Temujin did not make a public appeal for volunteers. The rumor had whispered from tent to tent and spread from camp to camp. A new force was being organized, a force that would not seek victory in battle, nor glory, nor spoils. Instead, it would seek death, only death and nothing but death. The volunteers began to filter in, understandably. Only a few came at first. Each one was personally interviewed by Temujin. Any who came because of some personal catastrophic emotional depression, disappointment in love, or any cause to have no further desire to live was dismissed. Only those who sought death because of some emotion within them they could not define, and those who write a mystic exaltation to the race of death were accepted in the new unit. Hurry to meet death before your place is taken. He strongly rejected braggarts. His healthy instincts helped him to weed out those who were unsuited and choosing those who would give the unit a very special character. Most of those selected were quiet young men with a mystical bent who sought to liberate the spirit from the body of the flesh. Young men who loved death and the proximity of death, not because of any particular reason or simply because they were born that way. Meanwhile, as the leaders of the desert tribes tended to join up with the winning side, the battle at Mount Gupta only served to reinforce the alliances against Temujin. The Yaka clan, for his part, sent his emissaries to the scattered camps and villages of the Mongols and requested a council of the Khans to discuss the situation. Some of the Khans were prepared to surrender to the Karaits and accept their conditions. The majority, however, decided to resist and proposed that Temujin be made commander of all the combined Mongol troops. During the winter months, both the Mongols and the Karaits and their various allies made preparations for the war. In the course of the battles to come, the superior numerical strength of the Karaits would test the fighting spirit of the Yaka volunteers. Temujin took the initiative and sallied forth towards the Karaits so that the final battle took place near their tent village. At dawn, the unit of volunteers, handpicked by Temujin, attacked the Karait army. They slashed through the lines and fell on the camp with the rest of Temujin's men following close behind. A fierce battle raged throughout the day. A fierce battle raged throughout the day. The Mongols rained showers of arrows on the Karaits and then closed with them. They pulled the Karaits off their horses with hooked lances, then hacked at the dismounted warriors with heavy curved sabers and axes. Damn! By nightfall, the Karaits were defeated, and those who remained found themselves surrounded. Temujin proposed that they cease resisting and join his own forces. The Karaits were stunned by the lenient offer and accepted the Yaka Khan's terms. A few days after this decisive victory, Temujin conquered the Karait capital, Karakorum, the city in the desert of black sand, which was afterwards to become his own capital. But at this particular moment, Temujin had no time to deal with his future capital. Without loss of momentum, he proceeded with his conquest until he was undisputed master of the entire Gobi Desert and its surroundings. When the last of the opposing tribes had joined the standard of the 9 Yak Tails, Temujin called together the Yassutai, the council of the Khans, to select a single man to rule all of the people of High Asia. Around the conquering Yanko Mongols, they were gathered the wildest spirits of all Asia. The Turco-Mongol warriors from the sea to the Tian Shan of Black Cathay, For the moment, clan feuds were forgotten. Buddhist and shaman, devil worshipper and Muslim, as well as Nestorian Christians sat down as brothers. Temujin explained to them that they must choose one of their numbers to have authority over the others. Naturally enough, considering his military success, the choice of the Kurotai was Temujin. More than that, the council decided he was to have a fitting title bestowed. A soothsayer in the gathering came forward and announced that his name should be Genghis Khan, the greatest of rulers, the emperor of all men. The council of the Khans was well pleased, and the unanimous insistence of the Kurultai, Temujin assumed the title he would be known by for centuries to come. I'm sorry for all this mess. The way they printed this, there's so many. There's a lot of grammatical errors, and half of the text is not printed as well. So please bear with me. Genghis Khan made use of the Kurutai to establish his army on a permanent basis consisting of regular troops and reserve troops. In order to strengthen loyalty and discipline among the desert tribes, he wrote out the Yasa Gengizini, a code of law, commanded it to be read aloud everywhere, and demanded utmost compliance to its rules. Concerning the organization of the army, the Yasa stated that the military should be based on units of 10. Every man in a squad of 10 would have 5 horses at his disposal. 10 such units would form a company commanded by an officer. 10 companies would form a brigade, and 10 brigades would be an army combat force numbering a brigade, and 10 brigades would be an independent tactical unit commanded by an orkhan, or general. He did not word that right. The Yasa demanded that these military frameworks be maintained even in peacetime. At the call of the Khakan, every healthy male would have to turn up for service at his post. Anyone trying to evade this duty was to be executed. Woo, damn. To bolster loyalty, the Yasa made it clear that a warrior who left his squad of 10 and a squad that left a wounded man in the field would be executed. Similarly, the death sentence was to be death to anyone who left the battlefield so long as the standard was raised. Damn. Discipline was maintained by the Yasa through the injunction of punish by death the refusal to obey an order. The non-fulfillment of a command or serious negligence in carrying out a duty, the Yasa did not relate only to military discipline. It also laid down the law for civilian life. Spying, robbery, rape, blameworthy deeds, false witnesses, and certain kinds of theft were punishable by death. Damn. Genghis Khan knew neither compromise nor pity in maintaining the code of the Yasa. He felt it was the most important aspect of his life's work, in contrast to the broad territorial conquests for which he had a certain contempt. An individual who did not fulfill the law of the Yasa was executed, and if it was a tribe, a city, or even a whole nation that transgressed the Yasa, the warriors of the Khan wiped them out entirely. Damn. This stern maintenance of the Yasa code brought about the Mongolian peace, which was extraordinary to the ambassadors from the West. It is said that a virgin could ride from the Caspian Sea to the eastern shores of China alone with a sack of gold, and no one would harm her. In the conclusion of the Kurultai, Genghis Khan stood by the standard of the 9 yak tails, which had become the emblem of victory in the past years, and spoke to the heads of the tribes. You who have divided with me, whatever good and evil the future may bring, you will henceforth be called Mongols. You used to be Tartars, Karaites, Makarites, Ugars, Turks, and other glorious names of tribes. But today you have become a single nation, Mongol. The Mongolian nation will be infused with a loyalty and discipline that has not yet been known by the tribes of the desert, to which we have till now belonged. Loyalty and discipline, these would be the greatest of the Mongolian nation, and it will be your greatest and the secret of your victory. After the return of the chiefs of the tribes to their villages, Genghis Khan gathered his high officers to organize the framework of a powerful army. At one of their meetings, it was suggested that Yassutai, outstanding as a leader in the volunteer units, should be given command of a brigade or army corps. Genghis Khan responded to the suggestions by saying, "In the entire Mongolian army, there is no warrior like Yassutai. The longest journeys do not worry him. He feels neither heat nor cold, hunger nor thirst. The word fear he knows only because he has heard it from others. In battle the hand of God rests upon him. Every arrow of his hits the mark. Every blow of his sword finds a victim. He is always victorious, just as you are always victorious. But you are victorious because of your supreme efforts, whilst he wins the battle easily, indifferentially, as though whatever was going on did not matter to him. He prefers to die rather than kill, but death seems to escape him. Or perhaps it would be more correct to say that death has no sovereignty over him, because he is a man he is a man consecrated to God, and God will take him to himself at the appropriate hour. For this reason, he is not fit to command a corps, a task that requires administration, and for which one has to stand firmly with 2 feet on the ground. He is more suited, Yassutai, for another task, no less important than the command of an army corps. Mongol custom demand that no one add a word to anything that Khakan brought to a conclusion. When Genghis Khan saw the tense expectation on the faces of his listeners, he himself added, I shall assign Yassutai the task of transforming the voluntary unit into a Mangudai. If he succeeds, there isn't a power in the world that will be able to withstand us. Mangudai is a term that does not readily translate into English. It is an expression of an Eastern philosophical attitude, not common in the West. Some historians have translated it as a God-belonging squadron, others as a pre-doomed group, and some have even described Mangudai as meaning suicide squad. It is very clear about the Mangudai is that they were fearsome warriors generally used to spearhead advances and crush the enemy's will to fight. In the Gobi Desert campaign, Yassutai had commanded a group of volunteers numbering no more than 30 to 50 at a time. The other Mongolian troops referred to these warriors by the name Mangudai. The Mangudai never looted, never raped the enemy's women, never got drunk, never quarreled amongst themselves. Had these qualities been their only distinction, the Mangudai would have been subjected to scorn and derision. Pillaging, forced carnal knowledge, drunkenness, brawling, were all socially accepted and positively reinforced among the Mongols of that day as thrift, monogamy, sobriety, and arcade games are today. Warriors boasted of the great amount of booty they had carried off, to include material loot as well as women. Alcoholic intoxication was judged to be the chief compensation for their hard lot in life. Fighting each other was though to be the inevitable result of their aggressive natures. Accordingly, when judged against the backdrop of normal Mongol behavior, Yassutai's men were viewed as social oddballs. But their exploits in battle and their feats of physical endurance made them mysterious legends around the campfires. They were said to have been kept leashed with iron chains. Their skulls were supposed to have been made of brass, their hearts of iron, their teeth were believed to be like chisels, and their tongues like bodkins. What's a bodkin? I don't know. Instead of horse whips, they carried curved swords. The Mangudai were supposed to drink dew and ride with the wind for a week without food or sleep, and then, without a moment's rest, execute a fierce attack. Once in battle, they were said to devour human flesh. Fireside, scuttlebutt aside, the Mangudai were magnificent in battle. Their accomplishments in battle far outshone not only the regular units, but other elite volunteer units as well. In spite of this, Yassutai's men were modest and unassuming in their dealings with Genghis Khan's other troops. They blended in and became relatively anonymous, never boasting of the deep reconnaissance thrust into enemy territory they routinely made. Once engaged in battle, the Mangudai became easily distinguished. Before the fighting began, they would take off their hard, lacquered leather helmets, which served to protect against the bitter cold of the Gobi, as well as enemy weapons. They believed that bareheaded they would truly face death. The other units preferred helmeted encounters with mortality. As the fame of the Mangudai grew among Genghis Khan's troops, more and more warriors sought out Yassutai and asked to be accepted into this select company. Yassutai proved to be factitiously discriminating, and very few warriors were permitted to join. However, he was careful not to bruise the pride of those who were rejected outright, as well as those who had been accepted and then rejected after a trial period. He would talk for hours with those rejected to convince them that their duty lay in assuming other tasks with the army. He also expressed concern that the men accepted into the Mangudai should not scorn those who were not, saying, "To do that which is right in the eyes of God is not to bring low, but to raise up the spirit of your fellow man." Legend has it that Yassutai was taught archery and how to ride as a baby. He was supposed to have been tied on a sheep and given a small bow and arrow to shoot rats and birds. By the time he was a youth, Yassutai's horsemanship and his skills with a bow were well developed, and he joined one of the volunteer units in the army of the Yaka Mongols. He would come to be known as Genghis Khan. What? No. Yassutai distinguished himself in several engagements, and Genghis Khan appointed him an officer. See, it's called Yassutai Genghis Khan, but no, they're two different people. And sent him on several special missions into enemy territory. After the final victory over the Karats, when Genghis Khan had decided on the establishment of a permanent Mangudai, it was Yassutai who was called to the white yurt with the white horse skin in front. Yes. Sitting on the horse skin was Genghis Khan, and surrounding him were the three chief Orkhans generals of the army. Chepe Noyon, the arrow lord, was the youngest and most impetuous. Wearing sable boots and silvered mail he had plundered from a wandering Cathanian. Chepe Noyon was moody and defiant, but his bold spirit was a delight to the Khan. Less impetuous was young Chepe, but more egregious was Sabutai of the Sabutai of the Urianki, the reindeer people. Finally, there was the aged Muhuli, the Jalayar, experienced and iron-willed. Muhuli had been with Genghis Khan longer than the others and was entrusted with more responsibility. He had been called the brightest star in Genghis Khan's peerless galaxy of captains. I thought they were generals. Anyway, I'm not... Man, I could criticize the hell out of this. But the story, anyway. The Khan spoke to Yassutai while his three chief commanders looked on. "I am raising 3 regular army corps that would remain organized even during the times of relative peace. I want each corps to have a company like the Mangudai. Do you think you can undertake the organization of 3 such companies? Yassutai. Yassutai spoke. Yassutai speaks. I was raised as a herder of horses, and my teachers were the wolves who used to prowl about the herd and attack the stragglers. We of the northern tribes are inclined to the opinion that wolves are smarter than men. So I used to watch them carefully in order to learn what I could of their kind of wisdom. I learned that the wolves have 3 different stages of being, depending on the kind of nourishment they were getting. In the summer, when they had plenty to eat, they resembled man in almost every way. They are cruel to the weak and afraid of the strong. They are concerned with their positions and try to obtain the differences of their own kind. They are petty and vivacious. In the winter, when they are often for days without food, they become bold and aggressive, even towards those stronger than they. And every day of hunger adds to their boldness and fierceness, until they are able to attack herdsmen armed with bows and arrows. A few weeks after the hunger, there is a sudden change in their state. They become subdued, and their eyes seem to express a reconciliation with what happens and what exists. And this acceptance is full of a genuine gratitude to God, who is the origins of all that take place in the universe. I wanted to discover whether man can be like the wolf in these respects. And I fasted for an extended period. I experienced the changes in my state of mind as a result of the hunger. And when you made me commander of the volunteer units, I used fasting as a means to achieving speed, fortitude, and ferocity for my men. You have already imbued the volunteers with the spirit of self-sacrifice, loyalty, and discipline. Add to that the element of fasting, and you will convert all volunteer units into Mangudai. The Khan was pleased, and the 3 generals nodded their approval. He then commanded Yassutai, go and screen volunteers for the 3 companies and train them as you have trained the Mangudai till now. Do not lower the standards of fitness in order to expand the numbers. I do not want quantity at the expense of quality. For the first stage, try to raise 3 companies for the unit of Muhuli, Chepe Nolan, and Subutai. Begin gathering the men right away and report back often directly to me. So, thus concludes episode 1 of the Mangudai. This is Mad Shad and his reading of Genghis Khan Yassutai. Thank you.